The first thing we're going to do is turn out the lights.
Yay!
Oh. And
Doug, keep your hands
see the button on this thing. Talk about George Catlin. Imagine that you're 10 years old and you're in the forest outside of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, when it was just wild, primeval forest frontier. And you're out there and you snuck out of the house with your dad's rifle and you lined it up on a deer. And just when you were ready to shoot, you heard a very loud gunshot and you looked to your left and there was an Indian who had shot first. And it really struck you. You were fascinated, but also afraid because you knew that the Indians had kidnapped your mom 3 years before you were born, but brought her back unharmed. That set you off on a life of being fascinated with American Indians. When you were a young man, your family sent you off to Washington to study law and you hated it. And you noticed that Indian delegations were coming to Washington to make trade treaties or something. And here were the Indians again. And you were fascinated. And you painted your first painting of an Indian called Red Jacket, who was one of the folks that came to town. But you couldn't stand being a lawyer. You knew your destiny was out west. So you went to St. Louis. It was a boom report then. And that's a picture of Catlin when he was a little older. Everything then was rivers. There were no roads, there were no cars. You had two rivers. You had Missouri on the left side and the Mississippi on the right side. Catlin's first trip in 1830 went up to a place called Prairie du Chien, where for the first time he actually painted Indians from life. It was the first time he was exposed to life outside the cities, the civilized world. He was fascinated by the people. Well, they played games. There were a lot of them. Here are a bunch of women chasing a ball up and down but there are no cars, there are no roads. On the way back to St. Louis, he stopped at Fort Leavenworth, where prisoners were held from the Black Hawk War, the losers, like this fellow, who was the leader. Catlin painted him. He painted the prophet, who was the brother of Tecumseh. He painted Keokuk. And he couldn't get Keokuk to get on a horse. Keokuk was mad that they lost. So Catlin told him, well, you know, I've heard you can't ride a horse as well as the whites. And Keokuk got really mad, got on the horse, and Catlin was able to get the image. And this guy, you can see the elaborate decoration that the Indians had. In 1832, Catlin set out on a trip that would make his reputation. During this trip, he made at least 200 paintings, paintings. He started out in St. Louis. He went up past Fort Leavenworth. And there were all these Indians. Lots of them. In different tribes, sometimes getting along, usually fighting each other. Sort of like street gangs in our cities. But he went up the Missouri on a stern baler. Now this is 1832. This is only a few years after, I think. Tell me if I'm wrong, but after, what's his name, Fulton, made the first steamboat on the Hudson. And here this thing is, and it's going up to Missouri. Getting stuck on sandbars now and then, but still. It was owned by Pierre Chouteau. And he worked for John Jacob Astor. And Astor owned the American Fur Company. So they're all like about the buffalo and fur. But they're also about selling liquor to the Indians. And the Yellowstone steamer was packed to the gills. Every spare space had bottles of whiskey. Even though the government had said you can't do that anymore, they just ignored it. On that boat was a fellow he had run into before, I think in DC, but he painted him in this painting on the right. This one painting showing the way he looked when he went to Washington and the way he looked after he came back. I think a little bit like our politicians today. And down here, you can see the effect of the Western style of clothing starting to come in, with some of the Indians, but very few. He painted about halfway up the river. It ran aground, he got off, he painted people. He noticed that Indians really like tattoos. They really like body decoration and tattoos. And here you're starting to get a picture. This is a human being. This is not some idealized Walt Disney character. These are people. This is my favorite Catlin landscape. This is Catlin and an Indian guide going after the buffalo. And I love this painting because I've always wondered what happened. It doesn't look like it might have worked out. And just imagine sneaking up on a herd of buffalo. Ooh. Prairie fire. It can come at you faster than your horse can run. He got emotion. He was always very good at motion. And the beautiful bluffs in Missouri, just land, no cars, no planes, no smog, no nothing. At the end of the river, as far as it was navigable, was Fort Union. And it was quite a place. It was run by a guy named McKinney, and he also worked for American Fur Company. And he put Catlin up in one of these inn towers, gave him a studio with very good light. And then they told the Indians, and the Indians came and were amazed that he could make their likeness. And sworn enemies would come in together and wait for the picture without fighting, which was remarkable then. He went on buffalo hunts. This picture gives you an idea of how tough this was. You would have to ride up next to that thing and kill it, or it would get you. Here's several of them going along and just, sometimes it didn't work out as well as they had hoped. You can see the Indians are having a tough day here. But then other times they really score. That brown blob in the center of the picture are hundreds of buffalo that they've got surrounded. And they're going to catch them, not for dinner so much as skinning them and then selling the fur to McKinney in the fort. This buffalo isn't going to last too long. The wolves are there and they're just waiting. And here are all these buffalo just going along, fighting each other. Along the river, when the boat stopped, he painted people. People, people, people. He was getting good. He had taken with him his paints, his brushes, canvases, and cakes of vermilion red paint. And he was able to replicate with that red the color that the Indians covered themselves with. He would, in the field, he would paint the portrait and then make very good notes about all the ornamentation. And when he was back in his studio, he would then very carefully recreate all that. The tomahawk is pretty neat. I don't know how practical it is, but I guess it worked. And it's definitely ornamented. This is Claremont, and this is Claremont's wife with her kid. Catlin painted women. What is special about his paintings is that because he never had a classical training as a painter, he just painted what he saw. So you're getting a record of what was, without any romanticized stuff. This was 1832. This was 7 years before DFG and France made a deal with Daguerre to make the first practical photographs, which were daguerreotypes in 1839. And this was God knows how many years. Well, the first color photograph practically, I don't know, what are you looking at, Kodak in the 30s? There were others, but Ansco, but still. It was amazing then for people to see what was not part of their, it'd be like if we sent somebody to Mars and they didn't have a camera. The Indians felt that this fellow was very handsome. He was bald, like most Indians. They shaved their heads. A few grew hair to please the whites, but very few. Now, here you see the full-on facial decoration, the hand on the face to, just let people know I'm here. This fellow, looking right at you, you can tell he would be a problem in a knife fight. And he has all the ornamentation. Same with this fellow. He's got all the bear claws, probably from a couple of grizzlies. There are a lot of grizzly bears in the prairie then. But again, that red clay paint. She was 13 or 14, and when Catlin went through there, her family was trying to trade her or sell it for whatever. Trade goods to the whites, status or family stuff to another Indian tribe. And it's a good portrait. She doesn't look too excited. This would have been, if you were dying and you were Blackfoot, this would have been the last thing you saw before you checked out. Here's another medicine man with all the symbolic, special spiritual things that he used to try to keep people alive, and he was trying to prosperous. And he was a man down which got Catlin into their village for a very special ceremony called Bokipa. And they did this once a year, and for the Mandan, it was a really big deal. And Catlin was the first, I think the only white ever to witness it. Because it got pretty rough. The idea was to, inside the lodge, to take 25 to 50 young guys and string them up, put leather tongs through their chests and hoist them up in the air until they passed out. And the longer they lasted, the more status they got in the future as future leaders of their tribe. After they were cut down and revived, they had to run around the circle in the center of the encampment, dragging buffalo skulls, or being dragged. And then following that, there was a bull dance where they symbolized buffalo fighting each other. And here you can really see a Mandan village with people on top of the, I don't know, what you call those. They're a lot more involved than just a simple hut. And they're strong structures. And at the end of the ceremony, the rainmaker would climb to the top of one of the huts and fire an arrow straight into the air to try to bring rain. And we could use this guy here today. The man then fought other Indian tribes. Here, it looks like both of these guys are going down. Catlin made a quick sketch of what he saw. This he never turned into a formal portrait back in St. Louis. This is the Sioux village in the evening, fire going, people dancing around in a war dance, probably getting ready to go out the next day and be in a fight. And the Sioux also practiced hanging up the young guys to see how strong they were and whether they would become a leader in the future. And that actually, this led to the ghost dance later on in the 1890s, where they thought if they could last, that no bullets could touch them. The Indians were all really good riders, like we're all pretty good drivers. This is beautiful. They could, you could ride on the side, like on the side of the horse, so somebody couldn't shoot them. I love this painting. I love the motion. Catlin, I guess a real fine artist would say that he wasn't really anatomically correct or whatever, but his paintings have motion. You get the feeling. Imagine yourself galloping around out there with your friends, just having a good time. Then it could get serious. And there are two grizzly bears here, and the Indians have a handful. The grizzly bears were smart. They weighed easily 1,000 pounds, and they were angry. And there you are. That's where the claws came from, around the necks of the men that had knocked them off. The last trip that Catlin made was up to Pipestone National, today it's Pipestone Quarry National Monument. It's where the red clay came from that made the peace pipes that Indians all over the West used, in the Midwest and out on the prairies. Like the peace pipe this fellow's got. And they were made out of really hard red clay, really hard. And many years later, a geologist who went out there after the frontier was settled went to that very place and then decided the name of that red clay should be Catlin, which it's called to this day. Now that's my presentation. I'm hoping that the Corral can put the PowerPoint of this online, and anybody that wants it can download it and pull off any illustrations you might want for whatever you want to do. If there are any questions?
I graduated from Mandan High School, and I think those are called mound houses. Sometimes my memory escapes me, but they recreated those very authentically, and I think it was the WPA in the 30s, right below Fort Abraham Lincoln and Fort McKean,
Okay.
which is on the Missouri River. And up above is Fort Lincoln and the infantry fort, Fort McKean. But they've done an amazing job, and I was back there a few years ago. They're still intact. They have furnishings in them, and it's a state park, but they've just done an amazing job, and I'm pretty sure they were called mound houses.
Yes, he shows these round structures, and they're very strong.
Yeah.
A lot of people on the roofs. I've never seen anything like it. They're not like the geodesic domes in hippie time. They're not like you stick a yuppie in the cellar. But
The Mandan weren't as nomadic. That's the reason. They would build a structure and they would stay there.
Yeah, in the Southwest, over 1,000 years ago. They were Mandan houses. The earth to cover the top came from it, so they were actually slightly underground.
All right, so if you went in one of those, you'd be going down on a split level. Here.
Was the Mandan site the same place that Lewis and Clark wintered?
I don't know.
It's kind of, it's close by today's standard. It wasn't that close by.
They
Yeah,
did
it
move
was,
to town once in a while.
it's above Bismarck. Mandan is 6 miles west of Bismarck. And Lewis and Clark, and they rebuilt that, and it's amazing, absolutely amazing.
We got a question back here. Yes.
I was just wondering, did he have a family or children?
Yes. Catlin?
Where did he live and die?
Oh, now that's an interesting side story. Catlin got married on one of his trips. No, he got married before his first trip out there in 1830. And then he just picked up and left his wife, went out, came back, spent a year in Washington, and then went out again in 1832 for his big trip, leaving his wife. Went back, came back, and when he came back, in 1833 or 1834, he ran into a younger guy who became his best friend. They were inseparable. In today's world, we'd probably say they were lovers. They went on an ill-fated expedition to the west with 400 Army dragoons due west out of Fort Leavenworth, and they all got malaria. 250 of them died. It was either malaria or yellow fever. Catlin's friend and Catlin both survived, barely. His friend kept Catlin alive until they could get him back to St. Louis. Then years later, time went on, Catlin went back east, they split up, didn't see each other again. And then Catlin heard one day that his buddy had been killed at Goliad in the fighting in Texas. And Catlin then went back with his wife, tried to be a normal guy and sell his artwork and get people. He had early successes selling or showing these paintings at Schieffelin Hall in New York City. Drew big crowds for a while. But after a while, he also wanted to sell the whole collection to the U.S. government. There were about 600 paintings by then. And he wanted to sell it to the U.S. government, but there was a panic in 1837. Nobody had any money. And there weren't any takers. And also the U.S. government had a policy of shoving all the Indians out across the Mississippi. And they didn't want any reminders about the humanity of the folks that they were evicting. He went to Europe. He exhibited in Europe for a time. He did well. Catlin had a knack of somehow always connecting with well-off people, like the fellow who ran Fort Leavenworth. It's called that now because Colonel Leavenworth died on the trip, the short trip where so many of them died. But he was friends with Chateau, who had the boat. He was friends with McKinney, who had the fort. And when he went to Europe, he was friends with a bunch of very rich people there. They connected him, and he showed his works. But he never made the financial success that he wanted. And he finally came back to the United States and ended up dying poor.
Thank you.
Here.
Is the red clay that he used for the vermilion color as well as for the peace pipes and that, is that the same or similar to the red clay and earth that you find in Oklahoma?
I don't know. I doubt it. I know that Tombstone is a special place. You can take that, you can knock it back with some oil, and bang, you're set. And then you just put your hand in some tar and it'll splat, and now you got a hand print on your face, and you look like you're ready to go into a fight. Catlin's paintings, I've seen real ones back east. They were in the National Gallery on exhibit when I went there. That red is bright. Very bright. And that was at a time, there weren't any acrylic colors, and artists just had basic earth element colors. You had some green, you had like browns, ochre, yellow. Blue was tricky, unless you had a lot of money. This was before the invention of coal tar dyes that give us our bright colors. And I think what he's done with his paintings is amazing to me.
There are a couple of things that ceased to exist shortly after Catlin went west. The Plains grizzly was said to be much bigger and more aggressive than the mountain grizzly, and it's extinct.
It is extinct.
It is extinct. We have mountain grizzlies now.
Yes, they are also fierce, but they are not that.
Not as big as those.
No, you saw that.
And the
what's also extinct now are the Indians. This is where it gets tough. At the time he did this painting, people in the United States knew that the Indians were on the way up. They were very vocal about it. They felt terrible about it, but they also felt good about it. And then one by one, these tribes just went away and were gone. And they knew at the time that this was happening. But there it was.
Mandan wiped out by smallpox
Yes.
shortly after his visit.
When I was a kid, my dad, there was a historical event going on in the Bismarck-Mandan area, and he allowed a Indian woman to live, and he fixed her up a travel trailer to live in while she was doing the event. She was basically like Doug, a vendor. She supposedly, and I have no way to prove this, was the last full-blooded Mandan alive. Her children would not have been full-blooded Mandan because she had no full-blooded Mandan man to marry. I can't prove that, but she had no reason to lie about it. So.
It's different times now. How about her?
I came in a little late, so I don't know if you already addressed this. Didn't Catlin also paint studies of wildlife and birds of the area and new species of fish?
Not that I know of, he may have. I'm not in my mind. But that's me. I don't know. I haven't studied his work in depth. I don't look at Indian stuff and the landscapes. I don't know. It's quite likely he did. He was, he trained himself to be a real observer. He was friends with a guy on the frontier named Doherty, who was a ethnographer. And he was very interested in making a historical record of what there was before it went away. Whether he would have done like Audubon, I don't think so, but I know Audubon was very jealous of Catlin. Yes. And, so much has been lost in time, just gone. But these paintings, you can imagine yourself. You can imagine yourself there, and it's a wake up. It's not like today. It's not like here. Yeah.
Yeah, so how was it that he became a famous artist? How did he market his paintings? And
Yes.
the last part of this, go ahead and then I'll follow.
Well, he got back east with crates of paintings, hundreds of them. And he was a showman. He rented Schieffelin Hall in New York City, and he put on his Indian gallery. He called it.
So then it was the genre of the American
Yes, he was the first P.G. Barnum. And people came because they'd see things that they had no idea. I don't know if we have an equivalent. I don't think we have anything equivalent to the shock. Well, first, the shock of the Indians. They believed he was a medicine man, totally, utterly, and completely. They had never seen their own image except in a pan of water or something. And they believed he had a direct connection to God, as did their medicine man, to Wataka. Harry.
Do you know by chance if the catalog of his works, the originals, are still in circulation, or are they mostly in museums now?
You're looking at the Smithsonian now. Catlin had a big collection of stuff. He ended up having to sell a lot of it to somebody who 10 years later gave it to the Smithsonian. And at this time, all of his stuff is pretty much in the Smithsonian, in the Gallery of American Art, with a few pieces here and there. So, anyway, thanks for your, and thanks for putting up with me. I am not like these guys. I am not a historian, but I love art.
I think you have a wonderful job.
Thank